The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Service Desk Institute, how to create brilliant service desk surveys. My name's Rob and I'm going to be hosting this survey today. I'd just like to introduce Daniel Wood, who's our Head of Research, who will be doing the majority of the speaking today.
Hello Rob, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us on this glorious sunny afternoon.
And I'd also just like to welcome Dean Coleman, who says he's had just 20 years experience on the front line. We're going to try and get out actually how long he's been working on service desk. So hello Dean.
Hi Rob. Yep, it is 20 something years, so I'm sure we can guess at ages a little bit.
What we'll do is at the end of the webinar we'll save all the questions up for them, but Dan will talk you through how to do questions. I'll hand over to Dan now.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very, very much for joining us. As Rob mentioned, there's lots of people on the webinar today, which is obviously fantastic for us to see, but that also means that we've had to put you into listen-only mode, so you can't actually ask questions via your microphone or headset. What you can do though is ask questions through the questions panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you put any questions in there, Rob's going to pick those up and we're going to come to them at the end of the webinar. We really want to make today's webinar as interactive and engaging as possible, and the way that we're going to be able to do that, because I cannot see your beautiful tan faces, is for you to use the questions pane, really get involved, pick our brains on anything you want. I'm Daniel Wood, as Rob mentioned, Head of Research at SDI, and it's an absolute pleasure to be doing this webinar today and to be joined by Mr. Dean Coleman, who has substantial, he hasn't committed to an actual number of years, but a substantial amount of experience in this field. So I'm going to be making good use of Dean this afternoon and to find out a little bit more about his previous experience with surveys and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully this is going to be a really informative afternoon for you all. I also have to thank our sponsor for today, Cherwell Software. Cherwell have worked with SDI for a number of years now, and they're really doing a lot of good stuff in sponsoring research and really pushing some material out to all of you, and they're the reason that we can do things like this without a charge to anyone. So thank you, Cherwell Software, and I hope you enjoy the webinar if you're watching. Okay, let's get started because we have a lot to get through today and only 45 minutes to do it. Right, I said interactive. I was not messing about, people. We are getting interactive from the very opening of this webinar. You may have been invited to this webinar off the back of a report that you might have seen, and that was called Creating Brilliant Surveys, one I wrote, and very modest with it. If you could vote for that, that'd be absolutely fantastic, because what we're doing today is being completely dynamic. Depending on your answer to this question, we're going to run the webinar in a slightly different way. I don't want to be repeating lots of things you've already read. I want to be able to provide you with extra value in this very short time that we have together. So if you could vote, that would be absolutely brilliant. So I can see that that's open now, so if you could start voting, that would be superb. We're going to keep that open for about 30 seconds or so, just to give you all a chance to get involved and make sure that we're really understanding our audience out there today, so we can create content just for you, bespoke, I think they call that. So if you could all get voting, that would be absolutely fantastic. Let's close that down, Rob. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you could close that. Okay, so 2/3 of you today, rounding up a little bit, have not seen the Creating Brilliant Surveys guide. That's fine. Okay, that's good. That gives me the information. So some of the stuff, for the third of you who have read the paper, you may be familiar with it already. That's okay. We're going to add stuff on top. Okay, let's get rolling here, folks. Mr. Bush scratching his head, as he is wont to do. I'm sure he's done that many times in his career and probably still continues to do to this day. But he has been asked the question, why? And this is step one with surveys. It has to be the first step. We have to understand why. Why are we running the survey? What are we going to do with the results? And how will the information help you? That's the easy. part, and then your customers. There always has to be an answer for two of those things. We have to know how the information is going to help you improve the service, but what's in it for your customers? Why should they bother responding to this survey? Now, I'm sure in our day-to-day lives we can all think of lots of examples where we've been asked for our opinion, whether it's canvassers on the street, people knocking on our door at very unsociable hours, maybe it's even those dreaded telephone calls. Can we have 5 minutes of your time? Even if you're just visiting the BBC website, you will invariably get a pop-up saying, please can we have a moment of your time to help the BBC keep its finger on the pulse. Now, all those things are asking for our opinion. They obviously value our feedback to some extent, but they're not really selling the reason why we should give up something that's incredibly valuable to all of us and which we cannot create any more of, and that's time. We're going to be returning to that a little bit later. But just to kind of kick off this webinar, I'd like to urge all of you who are thinking about running surveys, creating surveys, to really have good answers for these three fundamental questions. Don't just kind of run into the wind with this. We need to make sure that we're actually thinking about why we're running surveys, what they actually mean, and why we can do them. Okay, let's talk survey design tips. So we've got the answers to the three questions. We know why we're doing something. We know what we want to happen. We know the kind of things we're looking for, and why we should actually be doing it. Why should our customers get involved? Now, on your screen now is a very good example of a badly designed question. It's a terrible question, in actual fact. But this happens a lot more than you would probably think. I can recall quite a few examples where questions have been badly asked, and again, when we're asking people to give up something that's incredibly valuable to them, i.e. their time, we need to make sure that we make the survey as engaging as possible. We need to make it easy to complete. We really need to sell the message of what the survey is all about. And then we need to do something as well. We need to make sure that we're not just getting people filling in the same boxes all the way down, because that's the quickest way to do it. I wish I could tell you today that there was a golden rule for designing surveys, that there was one fantastic survey design that would meet all of your requirements, all of your needs. There is not. And if someone was to tell you there was, they're probably fibbing. Survey designs always have to be for their intended purpose. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the different types of surveys. So you have event-based surveys that are sent out when an incident is closed. They're going to typically be about 3 to 5 questions. That's going to have a different design to a periodic survey or an annual survey or biannual survey, however often you're running it. But this is a survey that is much more comprehensive. It looks at a broader scope of the IT service desk, and it will also be sent out to people who aren't currently using the service desk to understand why they're not. Is it because the service desk aren't professional enough? Is it because they don't know how to contact them? Have they had bad experiences in the past? All those kind of things. And that they could be around 30, 40 questions perhaps. So they're going to need a different design. They're going to need a way to keep people engaged with the questions and make sure that they're providing good information. So that's going to have a different design. So we need to really think about the flow of the survey, how they're running into each other. Are there kind of any logic branches, whereas if you answer yes or no to a certain question or respond in a certain way, it pushes you in one part of the survey as opposed to another. So we're not asking questions that are irrelevant to people. Okay, I've done a lot of waffling. Dean, would you like to step in here and kind of give us any kind of insight into how you used to design surveys at the UKN group or anything in your past career?
Yes, I think what I'd like to say, I suppose, is I agree with what you're saying at the beginning about why we do the surveys. I've seen a number of times over the years that surveys would be created with the questions before they come up with the reasons as to why they're doing the surveys. So for me, it's always been about understanding why we do the surveys, what we're going to do with the results, and ultimately what I was looking to achieve was better delivery and a greater sort of customer experience, so that's what we were always aiming to get out of them. You talk about the type of surveys that you can do. For me, the logic flows were always the better ones for me to push out there, because we could take people in the right direction. A little bit like how you started this webinar today, where you ask the question and it's going to flow a different way to how it could have done if the answers were different. But if you're following the logic flow, you've got to make sure that it's right, it works. I mean, I've filled in surveys in the past where they've asked me if I've ever logged an incident. You answer that no, and the next question is, how was that incident handled? So you can't have that type of thing going on. So yeah, the design is good, but it can only come once you've got a good reason for doing these things.
No, that's a really good point, Dean, yeah. And I'm sure lots of people listening to today's webinar can relate to that about badly designed surveys, and that's really not going to engender a lot of goodwill with our customers who are asking to fill them in. So really good points. Thank you, Dean. Okay, let's move on to the third one. This is probably the area that people maybe struggle with the most, or certainly they ask me about the most when they're thinking about putting customer satisfaction surveys into place. Again, there aren't really lots of hard and fast rules, except to say that when you think about the questions, you have to think about the type of information you want off the back of it. And I guess this is the area where most people fall down. They kind of fall into a trap that there are certain questions that they feel obligated to ask, or that they should be asking, without actually thinking about what those answers are going to tell them. What does it actually mean? So we end up with surveys, questions that are kind of irrelevant, they're not that meaningful. So I guess my top tip would be to make sure that the questions are relevant to you and what you're trying to achieve and what you want to find out. Don't put questions in there just for the sake of it, because as we're going to talk about later, you're going to really want to be feeding the results back to your customers, telling them how valuable their input was and what changes you've actually made off the back of it. I have got some kind of tips. These are covered in the guide, which you can pick up for free from us. Some of you, of course, have already read it, so I'm not going to go through all of them because that wouldn't be of use to you. But for maybe some of you who haven't yet seen the report, I'll touch on a couple just here. So make sure questions are relevant to you and the respondent. Also put them in language that they're going to be familiar with, that they're really going to understand. Try and avoid jargon, technical things, acronyms, abbreviations. It might make great sense to you, but please consider the audience and the customers who you're asking to fill them in. And also, of course, you have different types of questions. You have open-ended, where you're trying to engage with customers a bit more, get some thoughts and feelings around that, expand a little bit more. And then you have closed questions, where you're going to get a direct answer. So, do you currently use our self-service offering, for example, would be a closed question, yes or no. And then you can have kind of multiple choice. So you could say, how often do you use the service desk? And then you've got things where you can give them a rating. So you can say, on a 1 to 4 scale, how would you currently rate the professionalism of the service desk, for example? That would be kind of a very typical question. So just some tips for you there. If you want to pick up the guide, you can, absolutely. For the 2/3 of you who haven't, all that stuff's in there. So I'm not going to spend too long on that. But this next slide is quite interesting, I think. Just to kind of get a little taste of what questions currently service desks out there in the big wide world are asking. So we ran a piece of research last year, and we were asking about what are the most popular questions for you to ask, or what this question was actually, what was the most important question for you on your customer satisfaction survey. And these were the results that came back. So it's all there for you to see. Hopefully it's nice and clear for you all to see as well. But the top kind of 5 are about professionalism, courtesy, communication, clean and clear mechanism for raising issues with the service desk, and is IT support at an acceptable level. So for me, quite interesting, because the first 2 obviously about our communication style, the professionalism. We're not talking technical knowledge here. We're saying very much in a kind of customer service way, are you actually being dealt with professionally, efficiently, and as you would expect to be treated by any kind of professional service organisation. Dean, I don't know if you have kind of any thoughts around this area of questions, things you've come along, little tidbits you've picked up along the way?
Certainly. I mean, it's very hard to put down a full list of questions, as you mentioned earlier. So depending on the customers and the type of information you're trying to find out, then it's going to vary. For me, putting in open-ended questions have always been quite useful to try and encourage the end users to engage with us a little bit more and give us more information. We ask them where we can improve, what we can do better, how we can do it better. Also, where we're not doing, where we are doing well, what things do we need to keep doing the same way, so that we can actually see that we are doing well, because we report on these things back to our customers of the things that we do well. They want to hear what we do well, not just what we don't do well all the time. We also ask how they want to be communicated with, so what's their preference? Is it telephone, email, in person, and when do they want to be contacted back, because we get some interesting results from there as well. They don't want to be bothered at certain times in the day because they're doing important business. So we can gather that information in. It tells us a lot more then about the customer.
Oh, that's really good insight, Dean. No, thanks for that. Things I probably kind of missed when putting this survey together. That's really important stuff about, you know, Dean's talked a lot there about putting the customer front and centre of everything we do. Absolutely vital and very good advice. So let's talk about incentives. Look at that, a bag of money. Unfortunately in dollars, well, I don't know, we might have some American listeners online today who will be absolutely enthralled by the sight of dollars. But just to illustrate that when we think about surveys, lots of service desk organisations talk about incentives, especially for the kind of periodic annual survey. I have seen examples where for the event-based survey you'll also have a prize draw or some such to kind of drum up response rates and to really kind of get people involved. And I guess I'm a bit torn on incentives, if I'm perfectly honest. I can definitely see how they can be beneficial. They're a good marketing tool. We're going to come to marketing next, so I'll kind of wrap that one up in there. But yeah, I mean, definitely something like the kind of ubiquitous Kindle or iPad can definitely drum up some response rates. I guess where I'm torn on that is that also I do wonder about the honesty of people who are filling in surveys just for the incentive. Are they just running through the questions? Are they your typical, I'm going to tick the same box, good, all the way down for the entire survey, just because that's the quickest way of doing it, and they haven't actually read the question? So I guess that's where I'm kind of torn. On the one hand, I can definitely see that incentives are useful, can really provide some kind of glitz and marketing glamour around the survey, encourage participation. But also, I would always have a question in the back of my mind about how honest and genuine those responses were. If they're filling it in just for the prize, does that make their opinion more or less valid? And I guess that's a question that kind of we have to answer when we come up with incentives. And obviously, in today's economic climate, lots of service desks don't have access to budget or allowance for things like incentives. There's lots of ways that we can do that for free. We can provide incentives that aren't necessarily monetary. But for me, if we really want to encourage people to be involved with us, it's answering the value question. It's answering what's in it for me, what's in it for the customer giving up their time. If there's kind of so maybe the kind of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is that the more we learn about you, the better the service will be to aid you, to help you, to get access to the services and support that you need. So I think that's the main incentive. How we communicate that, how we engage with people is obviously a kind of different kettle of fish altogether. So yeah, I'm a bit torn about incentives. I don't know, Dean, if you've got any kind of thoughts on incentives at all. Did you ever offer incentives for surveys that you were running?
I think over the years we've tried as many different ways to get the return rate up. I think is really why we used incentives. When we're getting a good return rate, incentives almost seem less important. But when you're trying to get the return rate up, you're trying to get more feedback, then you all sit around the table and say, how can we encourage people to fill in the surveys, and you will go down the road of the cash, the vouchers, the Kindles, the iPads, all those things will get talked about. But we hit stumbling blocks with people in the public sector that can't accept those sorts of gifts. So we had to be a little bit more creative and have tried charitable donations to local charities, and market that we do that as for every event-based survey that gets completed, we'll make a donation to the charity, and we capture those at the end of every month and then pay the local charity, and then we feed that back to the customers afterwards. But it is, in my experience, it seems to be that it is only when you're getting low run rates that you really do push for them.
No, excellent insight, Dean, as well. And thank you for the differentiation between the private and public sector as well. I think that's something we can tend to kind of overlook in the public sector. Obviously, this is a completely different ball game when it comes to incentives. So perhaps even then, I like the example you used, really creative, about using charity donations, or even if that's not available, kind of really trying to engage people in other ways to get involved. Okay. We've been talking for a while now, so to make sure that you all haven't drifted off into a little slumber, let's open up another poll for you all to get involved with again. So the question, kind of really simple: do you offer incentives? So 4 options for you here. Yes, we always do. Sometimes we do. We never have, or I'm not allowed. So perhaps in Dean's example, if you're in the public sector, maybe this is a particular challenge for you guys, that you're not actually allowed to offer any incentives. So if you could vote, that would be really interesting information for both Dean and I to see, and probably for you guys as well to understand what all the other participants in today's webinar are actually doing out there. Rob, I'm going to ask you to leave that poll open for about another 20 seconds just so we get everyone involved. I'm sure some people might be going through emails or some such, so give them the opportunity to get involved today and share their opinions with the big wide world. So let's count down from 5 for that one. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you could close the poll off, Rob. Let's see what everyone out there said to us. Okay. Wow. Okay. That's really interesting. So no one will actually always offer incentives, and perhaps Dean's hinted at one of the reasons why that is. Perhaps if the run rate's good, then we're not kind of looking at incentives to boost those. So that's a really interesting result. Sometimes, so as in Dean's case, he'd probably fall into that one, that sometimes it was necessary. But 63%, that's an overwhelming result, have never actually offered an incentive. Perhaps public sector, and then 19% have said actually they're not allowed. Those are interesting results, aren't they, Dean? I wasn't quite expecting that one to come up, but
yeah, I don't know. So. Yeah, I was just wondering with the we never have whether that's down to luck because the return rates are so good, or it's just something that they've never needed to do.
Yeah, that's good. Interesting. Guys, if any of you have any kind of comments on that, it'd be great if you could put them in the chat pane for us on the right hand side. I think we're both quite intrigued by that result to kind of understand what's going on. So yeah, if you've got any comments on that, very much appreciated. And keep those questions coming in, by the way, if you do have any. We're going to attend to those at the end of the webinar. Right, let's crack on. Look at this young chap in his flat cap. This is to demonstrate why distribution and promotion is absolutely so fundamental to getting surveys right. There are so many ways available to us all now to distribute and promote surveys. We've got online, we've got email, we've got our intranet sites, we've even got in person. We could actually go around and solicit feedback there and then, and in that way, of course, we might get some more dialogue going, find out some more things. Also, social media, of course, so ubiquitous now. Obviously, different company policies on the use of that and how we want to use it, but just another way. And we could even get people, groups to send it out on our behalf. So, heads of department, would you mind distributing the survey? Really going to help us find out more. So obviously the channel you're going to use is probably going to vary over time. You might find that some channels are more effective than others and then start leaning towards those. You might try lots of different channels to try and hit as many people as possible. Obviously most surveys now are sent using email, which is great, but there's also a tendency for people to kind of miss those, ignore them as we try and kind of reduce the size of our gargantuan inboxes. So just something to kind of be aware of if we're relying on email to really get some feedback. Well, when we have a survey, and I think this is especially true when we're thinking about annual surveys and things that are kind of a bit longer and going to take a little while for people to fill in, it's about getting the timings right, so we're going to do it when people have actually got the right amount of time available to do them. And it's also about promoting them, really getting them out there in people's faces, make sure that they know that the survey's there. And there's kind of a golden rule around this. I'll probably put golden rule in inverted commas because I don't think it's a hard and fast rule. But when I was putting together the guide, I was looking at some research about how many times you should contact a customer about a survey before kind of giving them up as a lost cause. And the golden rule is 3. If anyone's interested in that, if you're trying to chase people up for responses, 3 has been shown to be kind of the limit to when people are actually trigger their interest and think, okay, I will fill that in now. Any more than that's kind of considered a bit annoying and might actually give you some bad points for the service desk if you keep doing those and pestering customers. So to kind of chase up after you've done your promotional and distribution channels, try and follow up no more than 3 times on those, otherwise you can kind of assume that people are not that interested. Dean, have you got any insight into this? How did you used to distribute surveys at UKN?
I think at the beginning we used to send out, certainly the event-based would go out to everybody who logged an incident, but we found that during our conversations and during the feedback that we were being told that was too many, they were getting too many emails about surveys, so we scaled them back to sort of 1 in 5 and then to 1 in 10, just to try and get the right balance. It was never easy to do that, but you just have to go with it and try and go with the feedback that you're getting, and that might help you. They're on the event-based ones. On the annual surveys, we would normally send them out at the same time every year, so we would use the marketing side of things to make sure that even if the timing wasn't convenient, we would try and market it, talk about previous year's surveys and feedback and how we'd made changes and improvements for people based on what we've done before, to try and encourage people to still fill in the new surveys.
Sure. A really important point as well that Dean just made about the number of surveys that you send out. Really kind of good insight there into not over-surveying people. Also, every time they close an incident, have an event survey triggered. That's probably could be too much, especially if you have high volume users with lots of tickets. So 1 in 10 and algorithms that sit behind that only send a survey to X number of person can be really useful in that. Just trying to get a nice kind of response rate and also make sure that we're covering as many people as possible without over-surveying them. Okay, guys, so we're kind of in the final third of the webinar today. We've just got a couple more things to look at, really. So this is an interesting one because this is obviously something I think lots of service desks struggle with. Something that I get asked about quite a lot is what is an acceptable response rate. Obviously we hope it isn't that one on our screens, which is 0%. But I think kind of a good rule of thumb is that anything above 10% or above is probably pretty good. You're engaging with 1 in 10 people to actually fill in the survey. That shows quite a high level of commitment. I think anything under 5% is probably, I think there could be extra work behind that. And of course, when we're talking about response rate, it really falls into all of the things we've been talking about so far. So Dean's mentioned before about how incentives were necessary when the run rate was quite low, so that's important. We also have things like, are your surveys badly designed? Are people don't want to fill them in because they don't understand the questions or they don't make sense? Are you asking too many questions? Maybe people simply haven't got the time to respond they'd like to, but there just aren't enough hours in the day. And also I think that lends itself to considering the industry you're in. Is it really high pressured? Are people really strapped for time? I remember I did some work in the investment bank, and the idea of customer satisfaction surveys to them were completely alien. Just wasn't going to happen because time was money. They're not going to spend time filling it in. Not saying that that's the right way to do it, because I think customer feedback is absolutely fundamental. We cannot improve without it. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But I do think that we really need to kind of be monitoring response rates, having our heads what we would like to see, but also kind of be realistic about what's actually achievable when we're asking people to give up their time. I mean, Dean, what in your experience would you have taken as kind of a good return rate, and when would it have kind of triggered something for you and thought, actually, this could be a lot better?
We set targets against return rates, and our targets, I think, started out around about 15%, and we pushed them up as high as 20% because we were getting good return rates, and we wanted to continue that so that we could get as much feedback as possible. I think we used the Institute of Customer Service, I think, about 3 years ago to give us a kind of benchmark, and they said between 16 and 22% was a good return, and so we set those targets and pushed towards them.
Excellent. No, very good. And yeah, those are really good return rates. If we're getting 1 in 5 people to actually feed back to us, I think that's absolutely brilliant. Lots of good information coming through there as well. So thank you, Dean. Very good example. Okay, guys, we are approaching the end. The end is in sight. So we're talking about kind of the survey process, and we've designed our survey, sent it out. Hopefully we've got a nice response rate. So we should be reasonably pleased with ourselves, but it's no time to relax, because actually the most fundamental part for me of customer satisfaction is 2 things. 1, people have given up their time to talk to us, so we have feedback that we need to do something with, and ideally we want to feed that back to them. What have you actually said? What have you said to us? And off the back of that, what we're actually going to do about it. So if 80% of people have fed back that the service desk is not professional, what actions are we actually putting in place? And a really simple way of thinking about this is you said, we did. 2 columns, straight down the middle of the page. Left-hand side, you said, this was the feedback. Right-hand side, we did. This is what we've actually done about it, or this is how we are addressing it. And that's a really powerful tool. 1, because it's so clear and simple. It's going to be quite visually appealing. We can jazz it up, make it really engaging for people. So it's great from that point of view to show that we're listening and doing something about it. But also in regards to kind of our response rates and getting people engaged with us, we're going to engage with the service desk more from a customer point of view if we feel they're actually listening to us, if we feel that they actually value our opinion and they're actually going to do something about what we've said. I'm sure we can all think of so many examples where we spent time filling in surveys, when we've responded to questionnaires, when we've responded to a text message asking for feedback, and then we don't see anything off of the back of it. And this also happens when we raise complaints as well. That's kind of a different kettle of fish for now. But really fundamentally, as I said at the outset, I got asked for my feedback at least 3 or 4 times a day. I always do it because I'm a glutton for punishment, and I want people to fill in surveys, so I kind of feel that I have to do that myself. I should be doing that myself. But it is annoying for me when I spend time providing feedback and don't see any of the results, don't see what's actually happened. And of course the supplementary part to this is the service improvement that sits behind that, the SIP, the acronym is service improvement. So we're really talking about what actually we do with this feedback, what actions have we got in place, what plans are we making to address these things. Feedback should be driving our service desk forward. It's a customer service environment. It's about being professional. It's about providing great service. All of that can be generated from the feedback we receive from customers. So really, really important to kind of get this step right. Okay, we are very nearly at the end, my friends, because we want to allow time for Q&A. And just this final kind of slide, really, final couple of things is just, it's just a clock, but the greatest gift that we all have is our time and how we choose to spend it. And I think sometimes we take for granted that people will kind of just fill in a survey, and it's just not acceptable to think like that. We have to think that everyone's time is really, really valuable. We have to make them feel appreciated and loved and valued if they give us their time, and we also have to offer them an incentive for doing so. It doesn't have to be monetary, but it does have to answer the what's in it for me question. It has to be a value proposition. People have to see the value of giving up their time to tell you something. which is what they're doing, and ultimately what they tell you will help you improve. So it's absolutely priceless, absolutely priceless. People spend lots and lots of money on all improvement programs, but actually probably lots of the answers are out there in your customer world that you just need to kind of get people to engage and share those with you. So the greatest gift people have, your customers have, is their time. If you ask them to spend it with you, make sure you're making a really good value proposition for why they should do so. And just kind of the final slide, and I'm going to pull Dean in here in a minute, is just a wrap up really. Dean, you got kind of any final kind of thoughts in a very Jerry Springer kind of way about surveys or anything that you'd like to share with the audience today?
I think for me it's always going to be about the feedback process and the service improvement, the thing that you touched on at the end there. I think it's absolutely essential that we engage with the customers and we get them on board, and the only way that we can do that with the surveys is to provide them with the feedback and to tell them what we've done, what we do with the action plan setting and how we're moving things forward, because I think we'll engage more with them if they see that their answers are going somewhere and they're being dealt with. I think, just to echo your comments, but there's nothing more frustrating than filling out a survey and just throwing it into the ether and finding that actually nothing's happened, or you don't know if anything's happened, and it's the not knowing. Get your customers on board with it and tell them what you're doing, and I think that's the way forward.
No, great point, Dean. Yeah, absolutely fundamental. You know, for me, I guess one of the main takeaways, well, I hope one of the main takeaways from today is to really value your customers, their input, and make them feel treasured and loved for spending their time with you. Another thing I'd like to kind of just touch on is that there are really no golden rules for surveys. It's going to be about answering those questions at the beginning about why you're doing it. Obviously this session is how to create brilliant surveys, and I do believe that by following some of the advice that we've talked about in this webinar, everyone and every service desk can start creating surveys that really engage with people and provide you with great information. But there are so many different ways in which you can run surveys, so I would never say that this is the kind of hard and fast rule for running surveys. It's absolutely up to you guys to take the bits of this that you think you like, or reject all of it and do it your own way. I think it's just important to kind of think about some of the different aspects of surveys, why we're running them. I think it's all too easy to fall in the trap of just running surveys without kind of any real thought process behind that, and that's ultimately not going to be beneficial for you, and it's certainly not going to be beneficial for your customers. Okay guys, so Dean and I have talked, we've shared some experiences with you this afternoon, but this webinar is ultimately all about you guys to listen to kind of some of the things we've got to say, but also to ask any questions that you had, any thoughts, feelings on surveys, any kind of barriers that you've come across, and Dean and I will do our very, very best to answer those questions for you. So are there any kind of questions out there?
Thanks for that, Dean and Daniel. We've had a few questions come in, so what I'll do is I'll leave it up to Daniel whether he decides to answer them himself or pass them over to Dean if they're really difficult.
Yeah, I'll take the easy ones.
So the first question's from Justin. Thanks for listening, Justin. How do you handle the subjectivity of the person being questioned, e.g. when answering if the communication has been effective, etc.? But I suppose what he's aiming to ask is whether the person's angry at the time or happy at the time.
Okay. Okay, I'll offer up something initial and then see if Dean has anything to add on that. Great question about subjectivity, and I think it's important when we're phrasing questions as well to avoid anything that's too leaning, or our service desk has been under a lot of pressure lately, we've really had our budgets cut. Do you think our service is still good? Could be jobs on the line. If you say no, that's going to lead people one way or the other. But I think in terms of really understanding what the customer is saying, and subjectivity, I think it's always important to have that initial point of response where the customer gets to kind of vent something to us or say something, and then take a step back, actually get further involved with the customer, find out a bit more about the issue. Maybe it's a long-standing thing, maybe the analyst was just having an off day, maybe there's just a communication error in there. We don't want to make any snap decisions, but we do want to be seen to be responsive to the feedback as well. All feedback is valuable. We need to make sure that the customers are happy to share that with us and would like to in the future. Dean, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'd just add that what we used to do, or what we do is we look at the any of the negative complaints or anything that we would perceive as a complaint when we do our review meetings on a monthly basis, and we will feed those into our complaint process, which would allow us to investigate further. We would see if it, as you mentioned, could it have just been down to the analyst and the mood they perhaps were in at the time. The same with the customer, or do we know something about the customer, the user, that might mean that this is a person who always is negative and is always complaining. So we can look at that first before we then take the next step, which is about contacting them and speaking to them. And when we've taken that route, we've often found that once we've reached out and said, we apologise, we understand you've had a bad experience, can you tell us a little bit more about it? The answers that we generally get back is that we were having a bad day, and yeah, sorry guys, I shouldn't have put that down on a survey. And that comes back time and time again, that once you get on the telephone or you go and visit the people, they have a different view, and it's normally just, as you say, the mood they were in at the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely, really good point. And I think a great example as well of, you know, Dean, his organisation following up with the customers as well, not just kind of leaving it hanging in the air or saying, oh, that customer must just be angry. You know, doing some kind of analysis to find out what's behind that. Is it person, process, or product? You know, one of those three things is probably going to point you in the right direction to what's going on. Is there anything else out there, Rob?
This is less of a question but more of a statement from Charlie. Sometimes if you offer a prize for a survey, people think if they give negative feedback they will not be entered into the prize draw, for example.
Okay, yeah.
So will not be entered. Thus the majority will tick all the correct boxes to make the survey no use at all. So I think that's a very good point.
Oh, yeah, no, it is, yeah. I must admit I felt the same way about filling certain surveys, especially when they're trying to lead you a certain way, or you believe they do. So Charlie's kind of suggesting there might not be a random element, something rogue might be going on. But no, great point, actually, yeah. Something I hadn't considered, really. So, yeah, thanks for that, Charlie. Really great input.
Just another question from Laura. What way is the best way to communicate the results of the survey back to the business or the customers, in your opinion?
Okay, I'll just jump in real quick and say I really liked, and it's shamelessly stolen from an SDC customer, but they had a, you said we did board around the service desk, and as I explained earlier, had all the customer feedback, all the improvements down each side. Then they made a really nice graphical display out of that, a really nice piece of marketing material, sent that to everyone in the business, had it on the intranet site. Really powerful, simple, clean, clear. People could see that they listened to feedback, taken it on board, and making improvements. Dean, have you got any kind of input on this, on how you fed back results?
Yeah, I think if you can put some powerful infographics together and send those out, they can work quite well. You can graphically present the things that you've done, the feedback that you've got, the scores that you have, but also the actions that you take. And again, I think I have to say that restating the actions that you've taken on the back of the feedback is really important. If you can do it in person, if you have that opportunity, then that's really great, but a lot of the time we don't. It has to be via email, website. But as I said earlier, another way of doing it is when you're asking for people to fill in yet another survey, talk about it then, talk about the things that you did for them in the past based on their feedback, and I think that gets people to realise it's not a fruitless task. They are actually, they've got a voice, and they're going to make changes by contributing.
That's a really fantastic point, Dean. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. If you can kind of state that value proposition right at the outset, this is what you told us before, we've done all this great stuff, please keep providing your feedback and we're going to make the service even better for you. I think that's incredibly powerful as a value statement. Definitely answers the what's in it for me question. Okay, I'm just checking the watch, and unbelievably, guys, 45 minutes have passed. I've certainly had a lot of fun this afternoon. It's been an absolute pleasure running this webinar for you, and I'd like to extend a very hearty thank you to Mr. Dean Coleman for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Dean, for your really valuable insight and input. It's been very much appreciated.
No worries, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay. No, anytime. You're welcome back. Guys, thank you to everyone for listening to today's webinar. I genuinely hope that you have found it useful. If you would like a copy of the guide, that's free to anyone to come and have a look at. And enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope you have found it useful. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.